Welcome to The Explainer. Let's jump straight into what is honestly a total biological paradox today. So life is hardwired to survive, right? I mean, our cells are constantly generating energy, they're repairing DNA, they're always hunting for nutrients. But if the absolute ultimate goal of biology is survival, why didn't evolution just, eliminate the whole process of cellular death altogether? Why would it preserve and actually completely perfect a mechanism that is specifically designed to kill our own cells?
Let's try a quick thought experiment. I want you to imagine a completely immortal body. What would actually happen if not a single cell in your body ever died? Off the top of your head, it sounds like the ultimate biological upgrade, doesn't it? We intuitively expect that this would mean eternal youth, perfect tissues, basically a biological superpower. But the reality? Total, absolute chaos. Without death, unnecessary embryonic tissues would just never disappear. Immune cells would hang around forever, which causes chronic inflammation. Old, damaged cells and seriously dangerous mutations would just keep piling up because there's literally no room for new cells to function. So instead of biological perfection, your tissues would become completely overcrowded and lose all their normal form and function. It would basically be a massive, never-ending biological traffic jam.
Section 1. Redefining life. The cycle of order. To really make sense of this, we kind of need a mindset shift. Life is not a system of permanent preservation. Instead, it's this constant flowing cycle of generation, maintenance, and crucially, removal. It helps to think of your body like a flowing river. The individual drops of water are constantly changing and flowing away, but the river itself, the river remains. Your skin, your gut, your blood, your individual cells are always dying off and being replaced, just so that the overall structure of you can actually survive.
Section 2. Sculpting and defending. The art of subtraction.
Early embryonic development is such a brilliant example of this. We don't just grow our physical features from scratch. We actually sculpt them. Take your fingers, for example. When you were in the womb, your body first generated this large, solid block of cells, like a block of marble. Then, it selectively removed the unnecessary cells between the digits through programmed cell death. And finally, you get fully functional, separated fingers. So biology is really just as much about removing the marble as it is about adding it.
And this whole strategy of subtraction, it's also our absolute best defense mechanism. When you get an infection, your immune system undergoes rapid expansion. Millions of immune cells multiply to fight the war. But think about what happens when the virus is actually defeated. If those defensive cells stay on high alert, they're going to start attacking your healthy tissue. So the immune system triggers a massive contraction. The vast majority of these heroic immune cells are quite literally programmed to die off once the battle is won, which completely prevents runaway inflammation and collateral damage.
Which brings us to a really foundational biological rule. The key is not just dying, but when, where, and how much to die. Actually, if a cell detects that it's been hijacked by a virus, it will often just sacrifice itself entirely. It voluntarily destroys the very factory that the virus needs to replicate. This microscopic self-sacrifice is the ultimate collective defense strategy.
Section 3. The renegades, when cells refuse to cooperate.
So what happens when cells refuse to sacrifice themselves? Well, you have to think of the human body as an incredibly strict cellular community. To live here, every single cell has to follow a very strict contract. They can only divide when it's absolutely needed. They have to respond to stop signals. They cannot monopolize resources. They must perform their specific jobs, and, most importantly, they must voluntarily die when it's necessary for the good of the whole.
Cancer is essentially a catastrophic breach of this multicellular contract. Cancer cells are cheaters, plain and simple. They are renegades that flat out refuse the rule of death. They completely ignore the stop signals, they resist natural cell death, and they just multiply out of control, hogging resources and threatening the entire community.
The big takeaway here is that so many major diseases are really just an imbalance of cell death. It's a context problem. Look at cancer. That's a case of too little death when it comes to dangerous cells. But on the flip side, neurodegenerative diseases are caused by the inappropriate, gradual death of essential neurons that absolutely should have lived. And heart disease? Well, that often involves a massive, sudden death of heart muscle cells because of a lack of oxygen.
In biology, context is absolutely everything. There is no universally good or bad cell death. To really understand health and disease, scientists always have to ask 4 critical questions. Which cell is dying? Why is it dying? When is it dying, and how does it die? The answers to those 4 questions dictate whether the body is healing itself or destroying itself.
Section 4. The Great Cooperation. The evolutionary price of complexity.
Let's zoom out for a second to the dawn of life, just to see how this incredible cooperation even evolved. Back in the very early days of unicellular life, one cell was the entire organism. If that cell died, game over. That was the absolute end of the line. But with the evolutionary leap to multicellular life, a single cell became just one small part of a massive whole. Suddenly, the selective death of an individual cell wasn't a tragedy anymore, it became a super vital tool to preserve the entire collective.
And because there are so many different kinds of threats to that collective, evolution didn't just invent one way for cells to die. It created an entire arsenal of self-destruct mechanisms. Different cellular crises trigger entirely different regulated death pathways. You have apoptosis for gentle, everyday turnover and development. But if there's a really nasty infection, a cell might use pyroptosis to die in a fiery, inflammatory burst just to warn the immune system. Or it might use necroptosis for severe stress, and ferroptosis when toxic lipids build up. It's not just one switch, it's multiple interconnected pathways perfectly tailored for totally diverse crises.
So let's tie this all together. Why does life need death? Because it's absolutely fundamentally required for sculpting our physical forms. It maintains the delicate cellular balance of our tissues. It ends intense immune responses before they become dangerous. It limits viral infections by literally blowing up the host factories. And it removes dangerous mutations before they can ever become cancerous.
Ultimately, cell death is not the end of a biological system. It sits at the very center of its homeostasis. Life became complex not by eliminating death, but by mastering it. The precise regulation of death is exactly what makes complex multicellular organisms like you and me possible. We survive entirely because our microscopic building blocks know exactly how and exactly when to gracefully exit the stage.
Which leaves us with a truly fascinating question to end on today. A cell's environment is constantly changing, right? It faces minor damage, stress, a lack of nutrients every single day. So between surviving, trying to adapt to that stress, and finally choosing to pull the plug and die, how does a single cell actually decide the exact boundary of its fate? Who makes that microscopic final call? Well, you're going to have to join us for our next explainer to find out.